I never imagined my life would be like this at the age of 72. I was just a typical widow, abandoned and alone, with a peaceful house and more time than I knew what to do with. After Tom died, people said I would get used to the loneliness, but the years passed and the silence remained. That's when he came into my life, Charlie, my dog, my comfort and my companion. And as it turned out, it began like any relationship between a pet and its owner. My daughter Sarah practically begged me to get a dog from the shelter, saying, "It'll keep you company, Mum," not realizing the company I'd be keeping. At first, Charlie was just a dog, albeit a particularly attentive one who seemed to know when I was feeling down, nudging my hand with his cold nose and wagging his tail to cheer me up. I used to talk to him a lot, and I assumed that was normal, because who wouldn't talk to a dog when no one else was around? But I can still remember the night when I first felt something had changed. It was the anniversary of Tom's death, and I was tired of crying. Charlie was by my side as usual, but this time he didn't just sit there. Instead, he crawled onto the couch and laid his head on my lap, his eyes locked with mine, as if he could feel the depth of my grief, as if he understood. "You're a good boy, Charlie." I silently stroked his soft ears, feeling my grief ease just by being around him. I remember thinking that he understood me better than anyone else because of the way he looked at me. It wasn't the typical way a dog looks at its owner. There was something deeper, almost human in those eyes. As the months went by, Charlie became more than just a friend. I'd wake up every morning to find him curled up on the edge of the bed where Tom used to sleep. His place was now taken by my dog. I didn't mind, of course. In fact, it became something I looked forward to. That warm body next to mine, breathing softly in the night, made me feel less alone. But it wasn't just his warmth that made me feel different. It was the way he began to follow me everywhere, like a shadow. More than that, he began to watch me with an intensity that at first unsettled me. Whenever I moved, his eyes were on me, always waiting, always expecting. It wasn't long before I began to feel a strange connection growing between us, something I couldn't quite explain. There was one evening, however, that stood out more than the others. It was late and the house was quiet. I had finished my tea and was heading for bed when Charlie trotted into the bedroom behind me, as he often did. But this time, instead of sitting at the foot of the bed, he sat down next to me on the mattress. His big, dark eyes bored into mine. I felt a strange flutter in my chest. "Charlie, what are you doing?" I asked, laughing softly to break the tension I suddenly felt. But he didn't move. He just sat there, staring. Something about the way he looked at me made me stop. The desire in his eyes made my heart race, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. I knew it was ridiculous, but there was a moment, a brief moment, when I could have sworn I saw something in him, something beyond what was normal for a dog. As if sensing the confusion in my head, Charlie nudged closer and rested his head on my thigh. His tail was wagging gently, but the moment was charged with something I didn't understand. I reached down to stroke him, my fingers trembling slightly, and then I felt it. A warmth, a connection, something I hadn't felt in years, not since Tom. From that night on, things only got stranger. Charlie became even more attached, always finding ways to be near me. I couldn't move without him being there, watching and waiting. He began to sit closer during our nights on the couch, his body pressed against mine in a way that felt more intimate than it should. It was comforting, yes, but there was something else, something unsettling, that I couldn't admit to myself at first. I remember waking up one night to the moonlight casting shadows across the room. I turned over in bed, and there he was, Charlie, lying right next to me. I should have been shocked to see his face so close I could feel his breath, but instead I felt a rush of warmth. He nuzzled closer when I reached out and brushed his fur, and I felt the unmistakable realization that my bond with him had deepened into something I couldn't easily explain. I tried to push the thought from my mind, telling myself it was just loneliness playing tricks on me, being an elderly woman who had lost the love of her life. Was it wrong to seek comfort even from a dog? But the feelings only grew stronger. Charlie seemed to feel it too, because he was always by my side, accompanying me everywhere. His eyes never left mine. It was as if we were two creatures drawn together by an invisible force that transcended the boundaries of friendship. I couldn't deny it any longer. I needed him more than I cared to admit. Then came the night that changed my life forever. I went downstairs, hoping a glass of water would help me relax because I couldn't sleep. My mind was racing, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was developing between us. But when I got back to the bedroom, Charlie was already there, lying on my side of the bed. He didn't even blink when I walked over to him. Instead, he just stared at me, waiting, as if he had been expecting me. At first, I was afraid to get into bed, but as soon as I was under the covers, Charlie moved closer, rubbing his body against mine in a way that seemed so intimate that I felt my breath catch in my throat. But instead of pushing him away, I let him stay. His warmth seeped into me, filling the cold places in my heart that had been empty for so long. I should have been ashamed, but I wasn't. In that moment, lying there with Charlie beside me, I felt a strange peace, a peace I hadn't felt since Tom's death. It was wrong, I knew, but it also felt right in a way I couldn't explain. We stayed like that for a long time, just lying there in the dark, two lonely souls finding comfort in each other. The days that followed were a blur of confusion and guilt. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had crossed a line. What was happening between Charlie and me was more than just companionship, but at the same time, I couldn't stop myself. I needed him. He had filled a void that I hadn't realized was so deep. But as the weeks went by, I began to realize that this strange emotional affair with my dog wasn't healthy. I had let my loneliness spiral out of control, and now I was caught up in something I didn't fully understand. I knew it had to stop. I had to face the truth. It wasn't easy to admit, but the fact was staring me in the face. I had to get out of this unhealthy relationship before it consumed me completely. I was looking for something in Charlie that I should have been looking for in my family and friends. Charlie was a great, devoted dog, but he wasn't the answer to my loneliness because he couldn't fill the void left by Tom. As a result, I gradually began to distance myself from him, spending more time with Sarah and the grandchildren, catching up with old acquaintances and trying to work out how I could continue to do the things I used to love. Of course, Charlie was always by my side, but I was careful to set limits. I had to remind myself that he was just my dog, not my partner. Looking back, I can see how easily loneliness can lead to strange and unexpected places. I had allowed my grief to cloud my judgment, leading to an unhealthy attachment. But I eventually found my way back. I discovered that no matter how much I loved Charlie, he could never replace the connections I needed with other people. So here I am, sitting in my peaceful home with Charlie at my feet, as he always does. I wish I could say that everything went back to normal after I decided to set boundaries with Charlie, but the reality is that it has been a slow and challenging process. There were times when I doubted myself because the quiet evenings felt too overwhelming, and I found myself relying on Charlie's familiar presence. But I reminded myself every day that it wasn't healthy, that it wasn't fair to Charlie or to me. He was a dog, a creature that gave unconditional love, but he couldn't replace the human connection that I desperately needed. I found myself seeking more interaction with people. My daughter Sarah was the first to notice the change. "Mum, you've been coming over more often lately," she said one afternoon when I dropped in for tea. There was a warmth in her voice that I hadn't heard in a long time, and I realized that my withdrawal from people had made them feel the distance too. "I just don't want to be alone so much," I admitted, not quite ready to tell her the full extent of my strange relationship with Charlie. How could I? I was embarrassed. Sarah had always been practical, the kind of person who would never understand how deep my loneliness had gone. "Well, we're always here for you, Mum. You know that," she said with a smile. Her words were comforting, but there was also a pang of regret in my chest. Why hadn't I come to her before? Why had I allowed my grief and isolation to push me into such a strange emotional bond with a dog instead of my own family? As time went on, I made more of an effort to reconnect with the world outside my small home. I joined a book club at the local library, something I hadn't done for years. At first, it was difficult to sit there and chat with the other women, all of whom were talking about their children, grandchildren, and their busy lives full of people. I felt out of place, as if my years of solitude had made me forget how to connect with others. But gradually, I found myself enjoying their company. We discussed novels over cups of tea, laughing at plot twists and characters that reminded us of people we knew. It felt good to laugh again, to feel the lightness in my chest that had been missing for so long. Through it all, Charlie remained my constant companion, but I was more aware of the boundaries I had to maintain. I no longer let him sleep in my bed, a habit I had come to rely on during my darkest days. Instead, I would give him a gentle pat on the head before bedtime, and he would settle into his own cozy bed at my feet. It was hard at first to resist the urge to pull him close and let his warmth comfort me as it had before, but I knew I had to stand firm. As the months went by, I began to notice a change in myself. I was no longer consumed by the overwhelming loneliness that had driven me to seek solace in Charlie. My heart still ached for Tom, as I had always suspected it would, but I was beginning to accept that loneliness and grief were a natural part of life and didn't define me. About a year after that strange turning point with Charlie, I took him for a walk in the park. The leaves crunched under our feet, the air was cool, and the scent of pine filled the breeze. As I looked around, I noticed other people walking their dogs, some laughing and chatting with friends. It struck me how easy it could be to just enjoy the moment and the companionship of both humans and animals. Charlie stopped to sniff a fallen leaf, his tail wagging contentedly, and I smiled down at him. "You've been a good dog, haven't you?" I said quietly, scratching his ears. He looked up at me, those big brown eyes filled with the same love and loyalty he had always shown, but now I saw it for what it was. Pure, simple, and unconditional, but not something to fill the void that human relationships are meant to fill. In the months that followed, I found myself opening up more and more. I let my family in and told them about the struggles I had faced and the loneliness that had consumed me after Tom's death. I even told Sarah, in a roundabout way, how much I had come to rely on Charlie. She listened quietly, her face filled with understanding. When I finished, she gave me a big hug. "You don't have to do this alone, Mum," she said, her voice soft. For the first time in a long time, I believed her. I didn't have to do this alone. I had people who loved me, who wanted to help me through my grief. And although Charlie had been an important part of that journey, I now understood that he couldn't be my everything. He was my dog, my loyal companion, but I had to learn to lean on the people in my life again. Looking back, I can see how easy it is to let loneliness take you to strange places and form relationships that make no sense to anyone else. But in the end, it is the human connections that matter most, the love and support of family and friends. Sitting here with Charlie curled up at my feet, I feel at peace. Not the kind of peace that comes from avoiding loneliness through strange attachments, but the kind that comes from facing your feelings and reconnecting with the people who matter most. After all, it's the love we share with others that truly heals us, not the temporary comfort of solitude or the influence of a dog, however devoted. Charlie will always have a special place in my heart, but I'm learning to embrace the world outside my quiet home again.